Saputo is a success story, growing from one individual cheesemaker to become a family-owned processor, marketer, and distributor of dairy products worldwide. Over the past decade, they have enjoyed significant growth through acquisitions, allowing them to become number one in the Canadian market and being based in 40 countries worldwide, all the while maintaining that entrepreneurial spark. However, as they look to more lucrative emerging markets abroad, they must return to a more focused expansion strategy if they wish to achieve the same level of success they have enjoyed in the past.
So you asked us, how can Saputo achieve profit growth of 20% over the next 5 years whilst mitigating financial, market, and operational risk? Saputo is a strong and reputable brand, a household name in Canada. However, its core markets are suffering from stagnating growth. Its commodified products mean that it has low margins, and its new scattered expansion strategy is both ineffective and risky. Therefore, we propose a 3-part recommendation to first expand into new geographies, to economize production through regional hubs, and finally, to enable certain capabilities to ensure this expansion runs smoothly and to stay ahead of the competition. In terms of what we're going to be covering today, Yanji and myself will first take a look at Saputo's business and the current situation they're in. We'll then run you through the dairy industry and where the value lies. Ed, Vince, and Izzy will then take a look at, we'll then provide you with our strategic recommendations as to how we capture that value. And finally, Ed, Vince will run you through the financial impact.
In order to determine whether Saputo can meet its growth prospect, we first took a look at its business, in particular its markets, how it's positioned in these markets, and their current and proposed growth strategy moving forward. Firstly, looking at their core markets, we've determined that this is Canada and US, where 96%, which form 96% of Saputo's revenues, including groceries. However, the environment in these markets are becoming increasingly more challenging. In terms of the Canadian market, players are beginning to consolidate, meaning they can gain cost and operational efficiencies. In terms of the consumption growth, this is completely stagnant. In terms of the US market, competition is also incredibly fierce, with multinational companies such as Nestle dominating the market. Whilst consumption growth is relatively positive at 11%, this is forecast to decrease to 2% at the end of 5 years. What this means for Saputo is that they cannot expect to gain more growth through acquisitions in these current markets.
So let's take a look at Saputo's positioning. Saputo's profit margins are facing pressures from its commodified products and low-cost strategy. Saputo's products currently sit in the small value-add to commodity range, with its core products being cheese and whey protein. There is further commodification in that it is trying to be the cheapest product in all markets, which means low profit margins. These profit margins are being further squeezed by the fact that it's pushing volume and price-cutting strategy in order to meet the increasing competition in domestic markets. This is resulting in increased revenues, however, decreased profit margins, which in the long run is unsustainable.
Looking at its current and proposed growth models, the past model has been given Saputo great success because of its staged acquisition process. They enter a market with a small acquisition such as Kea in the US market, and once they've gained the market knowledge within that climate, they move on to a larger acquisition to further build their distribution networks. Market knowledge is therefore essential in order to minimize the risk of large, aggressive acquisitions involved within the market or even abroad. Furthermore, their past success through acquisitions has been a result of grabbing more value from the value chain through leveraging its core competencies. Now, their core competencies lies in streamlining operations and integrating IT systems within the processing part of the value chain. After an acquisition, they're able to acquire a brand that they can market through and gain relationships in both the supply and customer side in order to capture value from across the value chain instead of just the processing part.
Saputo has moved from a focused strategy to a more scattered approach in terms of both its international acquisitions and exporting. Saputo has found a low-cost provider in Argentina and is now looking to service all emerging markets through that one provider. The issues with this are threefold. Firstly, there is no acquired brand, which means Saputo must push a foreign brand that is unrecognizable in the local market. It also has no market knowledge. And finally, there are no customer networks in order to convert those sales. So that was an overview of...
In terms of the risk, entering into an emerging market is incredibly risky for Saputo. And the three key risks are the lack of market knowledge, regulatory risk, as well as scalability. Overall, what this means for Saputo is that they may face restrictions in terms of pushing their products into that new market. They will face difficulties in operation within the market. And finally, they will have difficulty in adapting their production and supplies.
So that was an overview of our diagnosis of Saputo's business. Now we'll look at the industry and where the value lies, in terms of geographies, products, and operations. So in terms of geographies, the value is in the emerging markets, and the growth is due to the burgeoning middle income, as well as the more diet-conscious consumers. We've plotted the countries based on compound annual growth rate and their market size, and identified these 5 countries with a high market size and high growth rate. We then took a look at their regulatory environment, their competitiveness, and their consumption habits. And we've identified that China, Brazil, and India will be the most valuable locations to go into with minimal risk. We chose not to go into Russia because although there is high consumption behavior, this is not for value-added products. And also, they're relatively isolated in terms of geographies.
Looking at where value lies in terms of products, doing comparison between commodity products and value-added products shows that the latter has the ability to command greater margins, which are traditionally at 15 to 20% compared to the profit margins on commodity products that are usually between 3 to 5%. More importantly, value-added products are profitable because they are actually what diet-conscious consumers in your emerging markets are looking for. Looking closely at the consumers and breaking them down by age needs, we see that the most profitable demographic are infants, young children, and geriatrics because they have a need for nutrient-rich products such as infant formula milk as well as fortified milk.
So where is the value in operations? The value lies in a globalized approach to supply and a more focused and customized approach in terms of targeting the local markets. We looked at Fonterra, which has demonstrated the effectiveness of this globalized approach to supply, where it has standard procedures across its facilities. This has allowed it to have consistency, quality, and lower costs. We then took a look at Nestle, which exemplifies this focused and customized model within your target markets. And through this, they've been able to manage multiple brands, as well as targeting the specific consumer needs. That was an overview of our diagnosis of both Saputo as well as the dairy industry. Vince and Izzy will now run you through the strategic recommendations to capture this value.
Thanks, George. So based on their current performance, Saputo will not be able to achieve 20% profit growth over the next few years. Its core market is stagnant, and more importantly, its emerging markets growth strategy is in decline through Argentina. This is because it has been growing too quickly without building that market knowledge, and it does not have the connections with its customers that it used to succeed in its core markets.
So the conclusion is Saputo needs to change its growth strategy. And for us, this comes down to 3 components. In terms of international expansion, it needs to be more focused in the geographies that it goes to. It needs to sell value-added, nutrient-based products rather than commodified products. And it also needs to enter these markets through acquiring localized brands rather than just a straight export model. In terms of production, it needs to economize its production by introducing a staged production process, and also by forming regional hubs for being the base of your milk supply and your processing down to its raw basic ingredients. The third component is about establishing or developing what we call enabling capabilities. So things that will help ensure that when you enter these markets, you're effective and you can do so without risk. In terms of Saputo's expansion, we want them to focus on where the most value in the industry is. So if we take a look, it's actually in the emerging markets, but specifically it's in Brazil, India, and China, which have the largest growth in their dairy consumption. In terms of products, we want them to focus on infant and baby formula and in fortified milk powders. And this is for two reasons. It follows the consumption trends within these industries, but they're also high value, high margin products. And they're also able to be stored, which means it's more cost effective for you to produce. So in terms of rollout, we're looking that that Saputo goes to Brazil first, then within the year India, then within the year China, focusing on those two core formula and fortified milk powders. And then once you reach the Chinese market, then you can diversify into other nutrient value-add products. The way that we're going to do this is by acquiring processes and brands already existingly in those emerging markets, and that's because that's the model that works. If we take a look, acquisition allows them to cost effectively gain the production capabilities that they need, but it also effectively allows them to gain the customer channels they need to enter a new market. In the value-add value chain, Saputo specialises in producing the whey protein or the milk powder or to that base level. By acquiring processes, you can do that. You can acquire the specialised processing capabilities and then the local brands to sell them through. What we've learned is there's a value in the market for having local brands rather than foreign brands, as we've seen with Nestle and Fonterra. It's still a model that allows you to leverage your core competencies of entering a company and making their processes more efficient using your IT and financial systems.
So in entering these markets, we see you acquiring local brands and local processors. So what you look for, what Saputo looks for, should be local players who have the capabilities to create value-added products and also have relationships with their distributors and retailers. In terms of mitigating the risks involved in this, we see you doing the stage process. So going in for smaller processes first before engaging with larger processes and creating production hubs in these areas. A case study of this being successful in China, for instance, is with Biotime and Being Made, where they've been able to expand all over China through the stage acquisition process and learning the regional differences in each of the different regions in China. Financially, what this means is that it improves your profit growth from 5% by 11% in 5 years. So this is in two ways, in revenues and EBITDA. Revenue will increase as you go from Brazil in your first year, China in your second year, and India in your second year, and China in your third year. And by really engaging with value-added products, this means that in terms of your EBITDA margin, this also increases from the current performance that you have right now of around 11% to the industry standard of around 15 to 20%. This increases your EBITDA by around 85 million, and overall will improve your EBITDA by 182 million in 5 years.
So in terms of economizing your production, this is a twofold strategy. Firstly, it's about introducing a staged production process for this value-add products, and then secondly, it's about establishing regional hubs. Adopting a staged production process has two benefits. One, there's a cost-effectiveness benefit, but there's also means that it allows you to customize your end product to your end consumer, which is really important in emerging markets. So Saputo should be gathering its supply from where it's most cost-effective, and it should be producing that or processing that down to a base milk powder or whey protein or protein powder, and then transporting it over to the emerging markets where you've acquired these processes. And that's where the value-added customized processing element should occur. They can then take those baby infant formulas or those fortified milk products out into the markets through their existing brands. What it allows is a cost-effective economies of scale benefit at the initial production end, and then allows you to customize at the other end of the process. The way that, so the base milk powder is going to come from these regional hubs. And as you emerge into new markets, you're going to obviously need to increase the amount of capacity that those regional hubs have. Currently, you've got a location, Saputo has a location in Argentina, but it's very small. So the first 3 years is going to be focused on an acquisition strategy to build up the amount of capacity you have in Argentina. But ultimately, what we want Saputo to do is to have multiple regional hubs that uses the base powder products to send out to the emerging markets. The reason why you want multiple is that when you're working with dairy, you don't want all of your milk to come from one region. That exposes you to a lot of risk. So you want to have multiple hubs. You also want to have hubs as close as possible to those emerging markets. So the idea is to start with Argentina and build it up, and then within 3 years start building up in the Indian market. Once you've got the capacity that you want in these regions, that's when you consolidate your processing in order to achieve those cost efficiencies.
Economize will increase your profit growth by 2% by rationalizing your operations. we see this as a staged process. So this will only occur after a few years in your current production hubs. So for instance, with Argentina, this will only happen in the 3rd year out. So this is all staged in terms of Argentina, India, and China. With Argentina leading in the 3rd year, India in the 4th year, and China in the 5th year. The rationalization savings is around 2% of your EBITDA, just as you've actualized in your Canadian operations. The profit growth is roughly smaller compared to your expansion strategy, but we'd like to highlight that this is really a way for you to facilitate that expansion growth in the first recommendation, and this is more of a back-end supporting role.
The enabling capability strategy is all about the fact that as you shift your strategy focus, the nature of your company and the way that it operates needs to shift as well. And so we see that there are 3 issues. First, Saputo needs to learn to introduce an innovation culture into their brands that they acquire. They need to increase the expertise that they have in their leadership in order to effectively execute this strategy. And it also needs to have a set of controls that it can implement in all of its acquisitions to ensure that there's alignment across the company. The reason why we see an innovation culture needs to be established within the brands, and it hasn't been put in before, is because there's a shift in the product that you are offering to consumers. So your consumers are now getting nutrient value add products. They're going to be a lot more considered in their purchasing behaviours. Their parents who want to know about the quality, they want to know that the product is as high tech as possible and have good research behind it. And you're now working in a dynamic market, which is this infant formula fortified milk market, which is constantly changing. The brands that are selling those products and developing those products for you need to be at the cutting edge of innovation and research and development in order to drive sales. And we're happy to discuss how we would implement the innovation culture later in question and answer. The other issue that we see is that Saputo has a gap in its leadership expertise. Its current strategy has worked because its leadership knows about low-cost production and knows about commodified or low-value-add products, and it knows about the Canadian and US market. Now they need to understand about emerging markets and about logistics and about value-add production. This is a family company. We're not asking for a change in CEO, but we think there needs to be an additional position of a chief operating officer who handles that expansions for them so they do have that expertise and knowledge coming into the company.
We also acknowledge that what you really care about is your commitment to your quality and to your employees. And we see you doing this, and we see you standardizing this and keeping this commitment throughout your operations across the globe. So we see you do this in 3 ways: through your auditing, training, and incentive schemes. So for auditing, we see you really looking into the operations in each of those emerging markets and looking at how they're going each year, and also creating standards and guidelines for each of the operations. In terms of training, we see you really pushing for employee development in your emerging markets, just as you have in your Canadian markets. And in terms of incentives, this allows you to really align the goals of your employees and your emerging markets operations with the Canadian operations. So what all this does is that it increases your profit by 2%. Again, it's similar to the second recommendation. This really supports the first recommendation of expanding to emerging markets. But this is profit growth is driven by 2 things, and that's the revenues and your margin as well. So your revenues will be increased as you're providing higher value-added products, which have a premium attached to them. And this will be around a 3 to 10% premium as seen in the market. Similarly with EBITDA, this will have a greater margin of around 20% in the next 5 years, just as the industry has seen in different regions. Overall, this will increase your EBITDA by around 180 million. So, where does this all take us? Expand, economize, and enable will increase your profit growth by 50% from the 5% it is now to 20% in 5 years. But operationally, what expand does is that it increases the number of brands you have from around 39 to 70. It increases the number of facilities that are catering to emerging markets from 2 to 9, and also it shifts your product mix from around 2% value-added products to 16% value-added products.
So you asked us, how can Saputo maintain profit growth of 20% over the next 5 years whilst mitigating financial, market, and operational risk? And we recommend that you expand to new geographies, economize your production through regional hubs, and enable certain capabilities to facilitate this expansion.
And there are 3 things you can do in order to implement this strategic recommendation, and is to build capacity in Argentina seek a new Chief Operating Officer that can be brought into the company, and lastly, to roll out expansion by first starting focusing on Brazil. That concludes our presentation. I'll now open the floor to question and answer.
Hi, the floor is now open to any questions from the judges.
You said that we should or I'm trying to remember the words that you used about looking at the geographic focused expansion, because in the past it has been expansion that wasn't focused enough. And now we're looking at a plan in which we go into Brazil and China and India and increase what we're doing in Argentina in the next 3 years. I'm trying to rationalize being more focused, but yet seeming to do a lot of things really quickly.
So at the moment, their strategy feels like they want to export, they want to produce all the products that they possibly can within Argentina, and then export to wherever really will take them and whatever products really they want. We've said, look, these are the growth markets, these are the growth sectors within that market, and we see that if you can acquire companies and use their existing customer network and feed your production through them, that it can be focused expansion, but it can be expansion quickly. Because the fact is, this is a growing market and there are competitors entering all the time. You want to be in there now.
So I understand your strategy. I just want to ask you a question. You may have the answer. I'm just trying to validate if it's logical. So if I have to understand the milk industry and the Saputo industry, there's two major barriers for entry. Number one is how much you're going to pay the producers, the local producers, to agree on the common price, because it's it's commoditized, right? And the other one would be basically the health regulations, local health per location. So how are you going to make sure that all the production you're going to do in mostly South America is, and based on those regulations, could be accepted worldwide as you're exporting those products? Because some countries are going to tell you, look, country of origin, Argentina, no. Have you done that analysis to make sure that Argentina is, and with their health regulations, are accepted worldwide?
So it's twofold. Firstly, with the farmers. What we see with the acquisition is that you're building the distribution side, the supply side, along with the acquisition. So in terms of the farmers, a lot of the processes you're buying already have relationships with the production side, and we see what you're good at is in the processing side. So that's really something that's there, something you will have to deal with.
I'm okay with the process.
Yeah.
I want to make sure how the milk and the product is handled.
Yeah.
Is
So
it
the second
compliant
part
with it?
of regulation in terms of your emerging markets. What we're doing in Argentina is we're really breaking it down to the most basic part of milk, which is the whole milk powder. So just as Fonterra is doing in New Zealand, where they have just the milk powder, and that's what they export over to the emerging markets. This milk powder is standardized. It's accepted across all regulatory environments and doesn't have anything processed within it that would be a concern for any country. And that is why that's also under the strength of our staged processing, where you have your basic milk, and then over in the regulatory environment, over in the environment that you're selling, it's where you have your processing. So these processes will be compliant with the regulation of each of these regions.
So I can export, a South American milk to Germany, and Germany are okay with importing, for example, milk from a country like, let's say, Brazil, or that's okay?
Our understanding is that in terms of whole milk powder, it's fine for just a base product to be exported to any countries, including Germany.
Thank you.
In the first part of your strategy, you're explaining that you want to expand to Brazil, India, and China. Is there a reason why you go to Brazil first and then continue on overseas to India and then China? Or?
So the way we did it was we looked at, in terms of where your production facilities are at the moment. We're in Argentina, so the step to Brazil is a lot closer. And then we looked to, we saw China as probably the most challenging market. And so we went to India second, which then you can kind of get some market knowledge because then we want to potentially set up production facilities in India and then China in the third stage. So it's a location as well as implementing your production facilities later.
How much is all this going to cost, and what do we walk away with in the end?
So in terms of capital expenditure, what we've done is we've looked at sorry. So we've looked at how much revenue you were planning to get for each of these places, and we see you as acquiring each of these processors. So in terms of, I'm sorry. In terms of the target revenue for each one, we see you paying for the EBITDA just as the market would purchase those. So for instance, with the 36.8 million growth in the first year, we see you buying a processor for that with an EBITDA of around 7% as the market sees. That's around, and a 7 times multiple, that's around an acquisition cost of 18 million. So this production profile is actually well below your current acquisition profile in US, which is around $207 million. So this is well within your organic funding capacity. And in terms of what you get for it, this sees you growing your profit by around 900 million in terms of expansion towards India, China, and Brazil. And each of those expansion revenues is what is the base revenue for just the expansion at the top.
Just understand, your target EBITDA is EBITDA of the company being acquired?
No, the target EBITDA is the EBITDA for the processors. So usually the processors would have around 7% EBITDA. And so that's how much you're paying for. So for example, a company with a processor which has a 36.8 million revenue would have EBITDA of 2.6 million, and you're paying for 7 times that. So around $18 million in acquisition costs.
So what it means in 2014, you would be acquiring a company with 2.6 million EBITDA.
Yes.
Is that enough?
It's a very staged process, a very slow process. And I think for Brazil especially, Argentina is already well operated, and you already have your supply there. So it doesn't require you to increase your production or your capabilities as much as any other expansion. So it's a very slow process, and really in the back of our minds, it is to manage the risks that you're getting into, especially with these emerging markets.
Because if I look at your just to go back, if I look at your financials, I mean, I don't have the EBITDA number, but you're expecting between 2014 and 15, your revenue to increase by 400 million. Just by this acquisition?
Are you looking at this one?
I'm looking at the other one. I'm looking at the Saputo's current revenue profile is growing at 5%.
So this is their organic profile. Is it this one?
Yeah.
So this is their current forecasts, where it's just what's happening if they keep on going with what they're doing now.
Okay, I understand.
Does that answer your question, or were you?
So the growth is internal growth.
Yep. So the 5%
it's not due to the acquisition of 2.6 million of it.
No, this is
Okay.
what you would be getting if you're just doing what you're doing now. And in terms of additions, this is where Brazil, India, China revenues come in. And then overall, what happens is, shown here, where expansion will increase your revenues in the midline over there. That's visible.
So it's 36.8, that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have time for one more question.
Can you go back to the end where you said adding someone on the org chart? Could you go over that again, and what is this person's title, and what are they supposed to do? And
So the idea is that there's a fundamental gap in introducing a chief operating officer that sits below the CEO, who will be able to manage the international expansion arm within your company. So more specifically, what they will be running is managing the acquisitions into these new markets, because they have an understanding of market trends within these markets, and also the stage rollout of your operation